My name is Marjorie Bissett, and I'm chairing this meeting of the Policy and Resources Committee. This is a public meeting, and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording, and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded, and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. So we begin with appointment of substitutes. Do we have any substitutes?
Chair, yes, we do have one substitute this evening. We've got Councillor Aladitta here for Councillor Mark Bayliss. Just to note as well, we've also had apologies from Councillor Mel Alcott.
Do we have any declarations of interest on any item that's on the agenda?
Yes, as chair of the Arches project, I have an interest on that.
Okay. So move on to public representations. Up to a total of 50 minutes can be allowed, with each speaker being allocated a maximum of 5 minutes for members of the public to present a petition, ask a question or comment on any matter on the agenda or within the remit of the committee. Tonight we have Pauline Burgess, who wishes to address us about a matter that we are responsible for in this committee. You will have, can I hand over to Sean to explain the procedure? Or is it, or who will do the timing?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Julian, we're always ready with the timing. It's up to 15 minutes, isn't it? 5 minutes. 5 minutes, yeah.
So would you like to come to the chair, the vacant chair at the end there?
I'll have to read, I'm afraid, or else I'll forget some of the points I want to make. The Levelling Up project is a positive initiative. Investment in our region should be encouraged, but not for the reasons I'll outline below. The extension of Worcester Racecourse is not a worthy recipient of this funding. Horse racing is not a positive, enlightened or progressive activity. Horses are the only animals who can be legally beaten in public. This cannot and should not be accepted, let alone promoted in a civilised society. The University of Sydney in 2020 reported the findings of 2 academic papers which lend support to a ban on whipping in horse racing. They respectively show that horses feel as much pain as humans would when whipped, and that the whip does not enhance race safety. The papers were the result of almost a decade of research. In addition to the obvious pain caused to the horses, the public does not support the whipping of horses. A poll undertaken in 2022 showed that 72% of those asked were in favour of a ban on the whip in racing. The racing and beating of horses to satisfy individual egos, make profits for those involved, and which inevitably leads to the deaths of horses, is not a practice which should be condoned, let alone encouraged and invested in. Last year, 5 horses died at Worcester Racecourse. Thistle Do Nicely, a 7-year-old, broke his left back leg and was destroyed. Dorking Rogue, a 5-year-old, fell and broke his neck and was killed. Not Now, Not Ever, a 5-year-old, broke his left back leg and was destroyed. Beltor, a 10-year-old, fell, was injured and was destroyed. Fly to Mars, a 7-year-old, was injured, pulled up by his jockey and destroyed. In the first half of this year alone, Pebbly Lunar Lady, a 5-year-old, broke down and was destroyed. Dream Getaway, a 6-year-old, was injured, pulled up by her jockey and destroyed. Horses can live to be 25 to 30 years old. None of those who lost their lives in the last 18 months at Worcester Racecourse were even half that age. They were mostly babies. How can this be acceptable, let alone endorsed with public money? The deaths of these innocent animals should not be forgotten. The money requested from the government to invest in the racecourse should be diverted elsewhere. It should be funneled into progressive 21st century pursuits and cultural activities, not the spectacle of horses being beaten and possibly dying in the name of entertainment. For all of these reasons, I urge you to invest in progressive local initiatives, not Worcester Racecourse. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us. And speaking personally, I've been affected by what you've just said. I hope everybody else has as well. The decision last time was not unanimous. A bid has been placed, but it isn't by any means certain that we would actually get the money for that purpose. So we move on to the minutes of the last meeting, which I did not attend. That was on the 4th of July. Let's go through page by page. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. So everybody's happy with those minutes. Sit down to me to sign them. Okay, I'll do that later. And the next item is the minutes of the Income Generation Subcommittee. Page 1, page 2, page 3. Any comments, queries? So they can be taken as an accurate record. Then we move to item 6, Quarter 1 Financial Monitoring Report. Sorry? Oh, there he is. So, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just talk you briefly through the summary part of the report. The current forecast for the year-end performance against the balanced budget is for a deficit of 477,000. That will prompt a transfer from the business rates risk reserve of the similar amount so that we achieve a balanced budget. The forecast deficit comes about because although the pandemic is hopefully now behind us, the council's income has still not recovered to its pre-pandemic levels, particularly in the case of car parking income and income from leisure. Although there has been some improvement, as I say, we're still falling short of the budget. In addition to that, as we're all aware, the country is now facing some economic challenges. Inflation is now over 9%, particularly with fuel and energy prices rising sharply. For the council, I've bullet pointed the three most significant effects for us. Firstly, that the pay award budgeted at 2% is now likely to be higher than that. At the time of preparing the forecast, we assumed that might be 4%. Current indications are that it's likely to exceed even that. Gas and electricity prices have increased significantly. We did allow in the budget for a 20% increase. Prices are now higher than that and are due to increase, we believe, again in the autumn when the council's contract is up for renewal. So against the budget of 330,000, we've assumed a forecast for a further 64. And similarly with diesel, prices have increased significantly since the budget was set in February by approximately 30%. So that the cost therefore is assumed to now be 470k rather than the 373. We do have a contract with the County Council for the provision of diesel, which means we're getting on the back of their purchasing power a decent price, but that will still increase by the same proportion. Thankfully, it's not all doom and gloom. Paragraph 3.4 notes that the government, Bank of England, has increased interest rates. For the council's borrowing is set at a fixed rate, taken at the time that the borrowing was taken out. The current borrowing we have was all taken out before the pandemic at favourable rates. So the increases won't lead to any increase in our borrowing costs. However, at times during the year we do have surplus funds that we can invest, particularly at the moment with the grants that we've received from government for the major projects we're working on. We can invest those funds as well. Consequently, the interest forecast received has therefore improved by over 350,000, which will help offset some of the adverse movements I just mentioned. Housing benefit subsidy continues to be a challenge for us, although thankfully it is slightly better, the forecast, than we had for last year. So taken together, that's what brings us to the deficit of 477,000. Just notes on paragraph 3.7 and 3.8. The capital budget was set at £26 million, 26.5, and we now have a forecast of 21 million. Some slippage of some of the projects through into next year. Collection of council tax is slightly behind the budget, with business rates a little further behind at 1.7%. The write-offs for Q1 are 122,000, although, as we've said before in these meetings, we shouldn't take too much notice of that because it really does depend on the fluctuate. There's a considerable amount of more detail in the rest of the report, which I'm happy to take questions on rather than take you through all the individual pieces.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Mark. It's always interesting, quarter one. I don't think you're going to get too much of a hard time this evening. We'll see when we get to quarter three. It's actually go to the detail that you just mentioned, and I'm looking at Appendix 7, and which lists the programmes that we have funded or planned to be funded for this year. I made an inquiry today from officers about one of the programmes, which happens to be in my ward, to be told that it hadn't progressed at the moment because priorities with resources, etc., needed to be put to, which completely understand. Where my concern comes is that are those priorities in line with where the senior committee members want those priorities to be with the lead or whatever. And I've said it time and time again, at no point do I see a clear visibility of all of the programmes. We get to see the big stuff, we get to see the Scala Theatre, whatever, but it's those 20 other programmes which might be down in the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, but might be equally important to individual members or wards and residents, that we don't see. I don't believe we get a clear view of where the delay is, why there's a delay, if there is a delay, if it's on schedule until it actually is delivered. And I just think there's a better way, and I'm not going to come up with a solution now, but I think there is a need for a programme review board. We're spending tens of millions of pounds almost, but it gets reviewed in bits and pieces around different committees, and there's no overarching visibility that things are aligned with council priorities. And officers are having to make decisions, quite rightly, but they may not be the right ones all the time. So it's a comment really, which I think we need to debate at another point, but it's something I think that's clear. And I know the managing director's desperate to jump in and tell me he's got a plan, but yeah.
Thank you, through you, Chair. We discussed this very subject this morning, leadership team, because there are lots of new projects that emerged from last year's budget setting process, and it's not lost on us that in the next few weeks, when some of us might be taking a break, and then we'll be back into budget setting again, and before we know it, knowing the magic that Shane and Mark weave between them, we might be in a position where we've got some more money next year for some more projects. So it can only add to the list. So we discussed it this morning. Your point around process is a good one, and we didn't think so much about process, but what we agreed that we would do for this committee at the next meeting would bring an update on all of those projects, so that members can understand where we are in terms of prioritisation and where we are in terms of managing expectations, whether that's expectations around this table or expectations amongst our residents who have been promised certain projects by members in good faith. So we will bring something back at the next committee. In the meantime, we will have a discussion around the process as well. Thank you.
And maybe we need to set up a regular item then, from that point on, say every year or whatever.
I don't have your office bugged, David. I didn't know you'd been talking about that this morning.
Obviously, we've got a deficit predicted of about 473,000. My question is, reading the report, it looks like the plan is to just take that from reserves. Is there a plan to try to save some money to get to that? Or or are we just going to accept that we're going to take it from reserves?
Well, Shane may want to comment on this as well, but I think one of the council's strengths is that the control over expenditure is quite strong. Half of the council's budget is in salaries, and good review process in terms of filling vacancies and whether we should recruit or not. So I think the answer to your question is yes, there's a willingness to make savings, but not at the point where service level is compromised.
Thank you very much. A couple of questions. Looking at the graph on page 3 and the sort of forecast year end and what it's looked like in recent years, obviously heavily impacted by the pandemic and how that's affected service demand, income, etc. Within that, you know, there has been substantial monies. I'm trying to remember what CONF stands for, COVID outbreak something. There we go. Which is quite significant monies. Has that all gone? Is some of it still playing out? I think it's just worth, if you could explain the kind of ongoing impact of it still, of what is still there, or of, is that all now behind us?
So, yes, as you point out, the government gave council significant sums of money to address the pandemic, both in terms of providing vaccination centres, etc., and in supporting the local communities and economy in post-pandemic recovery. some of that funding still remains, and some of that is committed to ongoing projects, whether it's continuing vaccinations, and there's then uncommitted amounts which we're waiting guidance from government on. Those should be spent or retained.
Thank you. Then my other question is, given the scale of the challenge from rising energy costs, and well done if we're getting diesel less than some others, but it still is very significant. I know as a council we have had a programme and we have a number of electric vehicles. Is that, forgive me if no, I'm not aware of the conversation, is that still continuing? Is there scope for further change from diesel vehicles to electric vehicles? And in a sense, as the cost of fuel, petrol and diesel increases, the business case for electric vehicles kind of shifts as well. So where are we at with that?
I haven't got any specific details on this, but I can confirm that we've got a new interim fleet manager in post who's reviewing our fleet strategy and usage. And I think, like a lot of the public, electric vehicles are playing a bigger and bigger part in the thinking process. So you're right that we have, in terms of the smaller vehicles at the moment, the vans, for instance, we've got electric vehicles converted over to electric grass cutting, for instance, and so on. The challenge, of course, is in the big RCVs, the refuse vehicles. Not my area of expertise, but I think there are now electric vehicles available, and I think that's one of the things that I'm sure the fleet manager that I spoke of will be looking at.
If I may assist, Chair, because this is in my area of expertise. So yeah, from an HGV perspective, the electric isn't, the technology's not quite there yet. Possibly hybrid, but not really. They're looking at hydrogen, but it's some way off yet before we're at that point.
Chair, thank you. The last few years has been the money from Freedom Leisure in terms of the management fee, etc. They clearly have fought a valiant battle over the last couple of years, and I respect that, but nevertheless we're still in a position of some uncertainty with this going forward. I wouldn't expect a comment in the public domain about it's a live contract and we've got to respect the sort of finer points of that, but the broad point about how we manage income from which is a significant part of our overall budget going forward, given the fact that we may have to consider the sort of finer points of their contract going forward. I understand that you may not feel that it's appropriate to go into it in detail, but how can we manage this effectively going forward, to protect ourselves from that level of uncertainty from a significant income stream, basically?
Thank you. We have regular meetings with Freedom Leisure, and coincidentally have one tomorrow actually to catch up on the latest position. Their current position, or as of the last meeting, is that income from membership is still falling short of the pre-pandemic level, though interestingly swimming lessons are way ahead, so there seems to have been a shift in activity, and we're keen to understand and support them in that. The added challenge that of course has come along in the last couple of months is the increase in energy costs. The energy cost in in terms of running a swimming pool and leisure centre is quite significant. Fortunately, they're in a supply contract there, although that does come up for renewal later in the year. I'm not sure whether Shane or David want to comment anymore in terms of commerciality. I'm not sure there's a lot more I can say.
Thank you. Only to reiterate Mark's point that we are in regular contact with them. We meet with them regularly. But really, I think the issue of reduced income due to the pandemic is an improving situation in terms of income recovery. It's not, as Mark says, it's not fully recovered. But the fact of the matter is that we are not quite out of the woods in terms of income recovery, and now we are being faced with, I wouldn't say equally a bigger problem, but we are now being faced with a significant new problem, which is the utility costs. So we're just about getting ourselves out of one predicament, and we find ourselves in another one, which is much more difficult because it's not, there is very little that we can do in terms of heating costs. We're at the mercy of the market to a certain extent, whereas when we needed to recover participation rates at the leisure centre, we at least had the opportunity to spend more money on marketing, put on special offers, do something about it. So it was much more in our control. Unfortunately, this situation, we find ourselves in a very difficult position and with not very many levers to pull, if I can put it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Recently, when we made the levelling up bid, the museums and art gallery fell off the end of it. I've been told that there is money available to renovate, but so far I've heard almost nothing about how and when we might be able to move staff out of that building into another location that's suitable. What I would really like to know is, how much is it going to cost us and how can we face that? Because we do have a substantial donor who's waiting eagerly to see this happen. I think we need to throw him some red meat, personally. We just need to do something about it.
Through you, Chair, the freeing up of the gallery space will not be dependent upon, in the main, the staff moving out of the ground floor. The freeing up of the new gallery space upstairs will come about because we are in the process, through our other funding, we're in the process of moving the Worcester Soldier collection from the Museum and Art Gallery to the Commandery. So, and I met today with the Mercian Regiment a week ago, and I met with the Yeomanry today to agree new terms and conditions in terms of how we manage that. So that will free up the majority of the space we need to create the new gallery space that will be able to accommodate the new artwork collection that we're hoping to purchase with the donation. The ground floor is something we still want to do, and we have commissioned a piece of work on that. But this is as we're having a financial discussion, the issue for us is one of moving out and finding accommodation that does not then leave us with a substantial annual additional revenue pressure. So that's the issue, but it won't affect the gallery space that we're freeing up for the new collection. Thank you.
It's not just the gallery space, is it? It's the fact that we need a whole package. I mean, we need better loos, we need a new cafe and stuff like that. And that space needs to be freed up, doesn't it? Do you have any idea of timescales?
I don't have the timescales available as I sit here, but yesterday at the PED committee, members agreed the business case for the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is 2.9 million over 3 years commencing this year, and that's broadly 90% revenue, 10% capital, and within that budget is funding for refurbishment of the museum and art gallery. So we're hoping that the business case, investment plan rather, will be agreed relatively quickly. It goes in on the 1st of August, so next week. We're hoping for a turnaround within 2 or 3 months. So once we get the go-ahead from the department, we will have additional funds to invest in the museum and art gallery. And once we've got that money secured, we can then bring forward a proposal in terms of timescales.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's worth congratulating officers on the borrowings and having them at a fixed rate, and then having savings at a variable rate. That obviously is one of the big benefits of the current situation. So I'd like to ask, is the higher interest rates on our deposits, is that based on interest rates at the end of Q1 or when the report was written, or does it even assume where rates may get to with further increases throughout the year?
Through you, Chair. Obviously, the interest earned in Q1 is the actual that was achieved. For the forecast for the rest of the year, it's based on a combination of our cash flow forecast and the interest rates that have been provided by our Treasury advisors. That said, their prediction, their forecast for interest rates is for, I think, one further increase over and above the rate at the end of the quarter. So it's not a lot different than where we are. Cautious in that.
Thank you. I've got another question, and that's, do you think that the council will need to take a careful look at our fees and charges going into the next period to make sure that where appropriate we're making the correct increases to reflect costs, and whether we actually need a more flexible process in some places? Because, for example, the St Martin Gate electric vehicle charges are still charging 2021 electric prices, so we're massively underselling that electricity and probably losing a small fortune, because the process to actually get the fees and charges changed takes multiple committees to get through.
I did hear a rumour that those charges were going up, and in fact I've been asked to speak about it on BBC Hereford and Worcester tomorrow morning. So, sorry? Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the process is relatively simple. Fees and charges are set by council, they're retained by council, and the process for getting them into council's consideration is through the Income Generation Committee. Normally, obviously, the other committees have an interest in the subject, so they quite often go to the other committee as well for consideration and ensure that everyone's happy with what's being proposed, and then they go through that route. And in respect of the one that's just been mentioned, St Martin's Gate, there is a paper going to Income Generation Committee tomorrow to reflect, suggest a change to those. So, yes, we have a standard approach, which is that all income budgets, fees and charges should reflect inflation. And we then look to each individual line through the process that we go through each year to see whether or not there should be any variations from that. And target budgets for income are set on the past 3 years, the average of the past 3 years, and then again varied according to any particular local market interest. So there is quite a process that we go through to set them every year. And I think that it's become quite a robust and a progressive approach. And it is not as complex as it seems. It is quite straightforward, but obviously there are quite a lot of interests in aspects of fees and charges and income. And we have one anomaly which adds to a slight complexity in that Freedom Leisure's charges always go a little bit earlier because they work to a calendar year rather than a financial year. Apart from that, it's pretty straightforward. They get set every October, reviewed by the Income Generation Committee and approved by Council.
I think what you've outlined there works perfectly fine in a stable inflation environment. But in an environment of high inflation and rapidly increasing energy prices, if I was running a petrol station, I could change my prices once a year. You'd go out of business pretty quick. So I think we perhaps need a quicker process and not just an annual process, or one that takes many months for certain areas of the council.
Well, through you, Chair, again, there is no reason why we can't bring items for Council's consideration during the course of the year if there is a need to do so. So, yes, we can be more flexible about it, but it does, as things stand, remain for Council. Reasons that it needs to be and agreed by all members.
Are you satisfied? Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor Stephen mentioned about savings just now, and paragraph 4.3 refers to the overspend in relation to the temporary resources having been added to mitigate absence of key staff through either filling vacancies or through sickness and such like. And I suspect it's probably not an insignificant amount for the fact that it appears on this report. I see as one particular department, but I just wanted to know if we are in the process, as it suggests, of filling the vacancies, and are we getting the applicants to fill those vacancies, which I understand do prove difficult from time to time.
Thank you, Chair. I'll address head-on the question of a budget pressure created in the planning service. There is an additional budget pressure created by us looking at the permanent staffing establishment again and making investment in that, and we've reported that at the end of the last financial year. There's an ongoing budget pressure, however, using interim staff instead of permanent staff. Not on the first round of recruitment, but by the end of the second round of recruitment, we had a lot of success. However, we still hold one significant vacancy. We're discussing that, but it is partly at the mercy of demand for planners in a particular aspect of the business that's a national trend. We've made really good progress in our recruitment, as I say, not necessarily first time round, but second. So we are feeling optimistic now that our reliance on interims won't be a long-term. And you will see members, some new faces and some significant change.
So we move to item 7, the Q1 performance report.
Thank you, Chair.
Shane.
Thank you. This is the new performance scorecard for the coming year. Members will notice that we've got a revised set of projects, all of which are progressing happily at the moment. Now, a lot of those will be devolved down to individual committees for consideration as they're through the development stages, so the role of policy and resources was to get them to the point of being agreed and approved, and then they'll pass on to the other committees for work. In terms of the performance indicators, there's detailed comments against each one. I'll just mention a couple in summary that we've introduced quite a lot of the customer satisfaction, customer feedback So we're trying to understand better how our customers are finding the relationship with the council through the telephone, through face-to-face. And we don't have enough data yet for the charts, but there are detailed comments about the work that we're doing in specific areas to try and monitor that and understand what the position is. And that's also allowed us to do some work around compliments as well and the positive things that people are saying around the council. So that's a development on the annual indicator, which we normally have. And the other one, which are traditionally mentioned, and finally are able to say that the process for new housing benefit claims and council tax support claims are for the first time in a very long time, both within target. So Civica are determined to leave the contract in good order, which is good to know. Otherwise, if there are questions on any of the other details, then we'll be happy to answer them if we can. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first item on the list is City Centre Transport Strategy. It's only got one sentence there, and it's considerably late, overdue. It's been late by not months, but years, I'd say. Another thing in that report that says what the next step is or what we're going to do next, and I think it's not really good enough. It really does need to be escalated and to be accelerated, because this is a significant piece of work that's been outstanding for a number of years. I know it hasn't all been down to us as City Council. Other players in this have delayed it, but now we should surely be putting this as a priority to get this done. So can we have a commitment to get this accelerated for the coming months?
Sorry, can I just check, which item are you talking about?
City Centre Transport Strategy.
Okay.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just to confirm that Louis and I have spoken about this, and yes, it took us a very, very long time to get the work commissioned in the first place. I agree that the narrative needs to be improved, and we need to make sure that we will provide milestones so that we can manage everybody's expectations in terms of how this project is being expedited. We are at the stage now where we should be coming out to members very soon with an update in terms of the timetable on what's next planned. So I'll make sure that we get a separate note out to members on that. Then in future we make sure that the narrative provides a better explanation of progress. Thank you.
It doesn't help but jump out at you that committed to people we don't appear to be doing very well on. Yet when I speak to members, officers, they all seem happy, and I don't feel like we have a morale problem in the council. Yet it would be bereft of me not to raise the point that, you know, of the 5 objectives, we're red on 4 of them. I'm just wondering what the managing director's view on that is, because I'm hoping, like me, he doesn't think we have a morale problem, because I don't think we do with the people I speak to. But if you look at that, someone from outside, a peer review would come in and go, 4 reds, you must be all over the place. But I don't think that's the case. David.
Thank you, through your Chair. I think morale, well, I'll rephrase it if I may. I think in terms of health and well-being, it is something that the leadership team have on our agenda in terms of making sure that it's taken seriously amongst the staff, and you'll know that Sian is bringing forward various policies that help to support the health and well-being agenda. I think a couple of things really. I think the pandemic and the shift away from working in the office and the shift back to the office has affected people in many different ways. I don't think there are many families of employees that have not been affected in some way by the pandemic, which has caused problems for everybody. I think the other issue, and this is not a whinge, I think the other issue is we are incredibly busy at the moment and there is a lot of work on. So I think in certain parts of the business, people are feeling the pressure. You know, and as I say to, you know, the team, you know, one person's adrenaline rush is almost another person's panic attack if you're not careful. So I think, you know, there is an awful lot of work on at the moment. People are working very hard. We as a leadership team are working very hard to make sure that people don't feel overly stressed and compromised by that situation. The last staff conferences that we had just a few months ago concentrated on one item only, which was health and well-being. We didn't talk about budgets or performance, it was a single item. And we are now putting some additional measures in place to try to make it easier to accommodate all the things we were doing and help people manage some of the pressures in life, whether those are pressures that are within work, outside of work, or a combination of the two. So it's very much on our agenda and we are working hard to address it. I think there are areas where people are feeling very stressed, but we're doing our best to support staff. Thank you.
Item 8 on the agenda is the use of the Managing Director's urgency powers.
Thank you, Chair. This is a piece of housekeeping for us to note two particular use of urgency powers. Members will be aware that these powers are used when we have a decision which is in the interest of the Council but needs to be taken urgently for one reason or another, and we try to specify the reasons for that at the time. So the first is in respect to the provision of school meals during the summer holidays in 2022. This came as a suggestion when we became aware that funding for free school meals was only available for the first couple of weeks of the summer period. So there was a discussion which involved group leaders about a provision which we might make, drawing on our hardship fund to enable that to be extended for the rest of the summer for 4 weeks and 1 day, I think it is, but 4 and a bit weeks. And that was agreed on discussions held on the 11th and 12th of July. The reason that it was urgent is because we needed to get information to schools before the school broke up for the summer, so as to make sure they knew that this was available. So we took the decision in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of this committee at those meetings and proceeded on that basis. And then the second is just really to tidy up. I'm conscious that we made decisions around what was known as the Omicron bit of business grants funding. This was one of the extensions of our additional restrictions grant, the discretionary part of the COVID business grants funding, but I didn't bring a report back to committee to itemise our spend in respect of that. So I've just brought this now just to make members aware of the fact that of the 3.694 million that we had from government in discretionary funds, we deployed all of it through the various schemes that members proposed. But in the end, we used one of the areas where we had a discussion about how we might use some of this money in paragraph 3.7 right at the end. I just wanted to tidy up where we'd actually deployed the remaining elements of that funding. So you can see, in paragraph 3.6, we agreed the items of paragraph 3.5 with group leaders and then deployed the funding, as you see in 3.6, so slightly differently, so just to make sure everybody's aware of what the money was spent on. And the table at the end at 3.7 just shows that all of the grants which were made and the value of the payments in total. So members can be assured that I haven't kept any for rainy day. It's all been spent, all been deployed to local businesses.
Well, not so much a question, but a comment on huge thank you to officers around the provision of the free school meals and that decision. I think officers responded very rapidly to member requests and to a very urgent situation and worked incredibly hard to identify the funding and to deliver a programme that reached children, hopefully, in time. So a huge well done for that. And I think it's also worth noting that, you know, a number of us as councillors and this council with officer support have had hardship measures in place for many years. So the fact that we still have a discretionary welfare assistance scheme at this council, and that we have a scheme for 100% council tax reduction for households that are really struggling, enabled optimum use, enabled the funding, the recent national funding for the Household Support Fund to be used in this way. So well done Worcester, and well done us for being a caring and responsive council.
With which you seem to have searched out all the people who might receive. Lucy.
I would like to thank the actual members on the Task and Finish group from the cost of living crisis, Louise, our chairman, and through cross-party support, we were able to speak to the officers to make sure that it actually did happen. So thank you very much for the officers, and also thank you to the officers who put on the cost of living seminar as well, as for to see how the city was coping with the cost of living and the voluntary sectors and that sort of thing. So thank you for that as well, because that is quite a lot. Well, I know that was quite a lot of work. So thank you.
James.
Chair, thank you. I think I'd like to echo both Lynn and Lucy's comments. This is an extremely important piece of work. There are a number of families represent an area that will be immensely relieved to know that this is happening, and we should all be proud of the work that we're doing to move as many families as possible through a period of great uncertainty towards what we hope will be a more certain future. So, I mean, without going into any of the detail, big thanks to everyone who's been responsible for this work, and we should all be thankful of the fact that this is a cross-party consensus that has brought this about, and long may that continue.
James.
Thank you. I am enormously relieved to see this. It was 3 years ago when I first put in place a programme at Ronkswood to feed hungry children during the holidays. And we served 550 hot meals, gave children a couple of pieces of fruit to take home. It was crucial to the survival and well-being of those families, because the youth and community workers were saying to me that children were coming in at about 6 in the evening to youth sessions, and they hadn't had the first 2 meals of the day. So seeing this really does make a difference. Clearly the crisis has grown quite a bit since then, and I don't think it's a crisis that's going to go away quickly. I think we know that our economy is in quite a bit of trouble at the moment. So I would like us very much to keep an eye on this as time goes on, measure the success of it as best we can, and continue to work with the county, whom I know are particularly concerned about equalities from a public health view, as well as children and families view. So, yeah, this is just such a lifeline. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any further questions or comments? Can I ask the members then to note the use of urgency powers to implement a scheme for the provision of free school meals and to implement a scheme for deferring remaining discretionary business grant funding. Item 9 on the agenda is the working carers policy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the committee will note from the report that a new working carers policy for the council was something which was discussed at the Joint Safety and Consultative Committee recently. In fact, members of the committee had proposed that this was a line of inquiry, really, that the council should look at. So officers had gone away, explored what the council's current offer to employees is when it comes to balancing work and caring responsibilities at home. And what was recognised through the review work was that the council had a good offer, but it could be more codified, clarified, brought into one place. And also that we could anticipate what the government is going to bring in relation to an additional legal right, which is the government's committed to introducing when parliamentary time allows. Gov.uk says that will be 1 week's paid leave for carers. So, sorry, forgive me, 1 week unpaid leave for carers here. Now, from the council's point of view, we already had a provision in our special conditions of service, which are local government negotiated service, that said that staff could have up to 7 days paid leave a year for special circumstances, which may or may not include caring. It could be other circumstances. What we've done in this new carers policy is made it clear that the council will honour both the new week unpaid leave as well as separately the 7 day special leave, meaning that if it's time off that somebody requires for caring responsibilities, they can count both periods of time off. So that's an additional bonus, additional benefit that wasn't there. In other respects, the policy just makes clear what our arrangements are in place in terms of a formal right to request for flexible working, and our duty to consider whether somebody has caring responsibilities if we're making changes to terms and conditions. We've used the definition in the policy that the government are using in terms of carers, who is a carer, recognising it's quite a modern definition, really, recognising that a lot of people with extended family networks may find themselves in a caring situation at different points in their life. But the policy obviously attempts to strike the balance then between giving employees clarity and certainty about what time off they can expect, paid and unpaid, balancing that with the needs of the business to understand whether employees are going to be in work and plan for those. So the policy, having been discussed and amended and improved by JCSE, is recommended for approval tonight by this committee.
Thank you, Sian. I must say it looks like a very sound policy. Welcome its introduction. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Lynn?
Yes, I mean, again, to say thank you very much to officers. I think there's a person or the councillor that kind of initiated this or asked officers. It is really nice to see a piece of work tracked through council systems to being, as a policy, very much welcome it. And it is, you know, an aspect we were talking earlier about health and well-being of our employees. You know, this is a strand. A policy that acknowledges people have lives outside employment, and as an employer we are mindful of that and support. Yeah, well done to all. I'm really pleased to be able to sign it off.
Just a question, Chair. Has this been through personnel and GP? Because I would normally expect JCSE items to go there.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, that's my omission. It was scheduled for Personnel and General Purposes Committee, absolutely, as you say, but we didn't have a Personnel and General Purposes Committee recently due to want of business other than this item. So we've brought it to the full Policy Committee instead of the
Thanks. I think actually this is one of the few times when I have felt that Worcester City Council is showing itself to be a truly caring organisation. You know what I mean? Sometimes well, you know, we have a lot of administrative things to do and we forget the human beings among us. And this actually says we do care. And we do care about the stress, the mental health issues, and all the rest of it that we know carers experience. So this is so welcome.
Members to approve the new working carers policy as set out in Appendix 1. Thank you. Then we move on to item 10, appointments to outside bodies. Dawn, I believe that's also you.
Thank you, Chair. The committee will be aware that we have an annual process of making appointments to outside bodies, but additionally we will bring a report forward when a vacancy arises on one of the outside bodies to which we appoint, and this is one of those occasions. So a vacancy has arisen in relation to our right to appoint to Worcester Municipal Charities. That arises as on the occasion of former councillor Mike Johnson stepping down from his trusteeship. The council has a right to appoint anybody to this to serve as a trustee. It's a personal appointment, and therefore, according to the constitution of the Worcester Municipal Charities, that person may serve for a term of 4 years. But Worcester Municipal Charities have indicated that if there is a preference, that person may serve instead for the shorter term, which would just take that appointment to when Johnson's term was due to expire, which is next May. So there's that option if that's easier in terms of members managing their commitments and diaries and so forth. Julian's kindly circulated a note previously alerting members to the level of commitment that comes with this appointment. This is a more significant appointment in terms of time commitment than some of the other outside bodies to which we appoint. But it's a matter for the committee, obviously, to propose a name and if you have more than one name, Chair, you'll wish to take a vote on each one.
So I think, first of all, does anybody have any comments on the paper? If not, do we have any nominations? James?
Thank you. I'm delighted to say that Parish Councillor Alan Tidy, who many people will have encountered over the years, is happy with, subject to members' approval, to take on the role.
In that case, can I ask members to approve the appointment of Ellen Tidy? Oh, Sean.
Chair, can I just ascertain, I can always find out after the meeting if necessary, is that, does Mr Tidy wish to be appointed for a full 4 years or the shorter duration? So just to be clear, the committee would support either? Yes, okay.
So we move on to item 11, which is the appointment of the Armed Forces Champion.
Thank you, Chair. A vacancy has arisen for a member champion. Again, it's a function of this committee to appoint into existing member champion roles. And this vacancy has arisen because Councillor Chris Mitchell has stepped down from his appointment as Armed Forces Champion. You're therefore invited to consider appointing a replacement. The report sets out a little bit of what the Armed Forces Champion, what the role requires, and obviously Councillor Mitchell is here himself tonight, so he could always elaborate on the role if members wished. It's clear now we have in terms of reference for member champions, they are fairly broad brush. It's very much recognised that a member champion will carve their own role, recognising that the common uniting characteristic of all member champion roles is they're an advocate for a particular interest or a particular community group. They're a voice, they're a link between the council and either other community groups. And the member champion in relation to armed forces has a particular opportunity and role to play, both in relation to the remembrance activity that happens in the city, as well as our representative groups in the city, the fact that the council has signed up to the Armed Forces Community Covenant. There is a small budget that comes with the Armed Forces Champion role, which is administered through the Section 151 officer. Again, it's a matter for this committee to propose names and to vote on them if you have more than one.
Thank you, Sean. Do you wish to add anything?
No, I wish to make a proposal, and in terms of, I'm not resigning for any reason other than unfortunately ill health, and my wife told me I needed to ease off on some of the things I was doing, so that's the reason. And I'll argue with anyone in this chamber, but I won't argue with my wife because she wins every time. So that's the reason, and I do it with some regret, but it's the best thing at the time.
Can I just say thank you very much for your performance in this role? It's been really good, valuable.
Chair, please, I'd like to nominate Councillor Stanley. The reason for my nomination is, one, I've worked quite closely with him with a veterans charity. I know his involvement with the military organisations and veterans is already cemented. He's well known within the veteran community and others, including CCF, etc. So I think he'd make an excellent candidate. I don't know whether anyone else is going to be nominated, but I would definitely propose Councillor Stanley.
Thank you. First of all, I mean, to give my thanks to Councillor Mitchell. I don't know whether you were our first champion of any kind in the council. You were definitely our first forces champion, and there's absolutely no doubt about your passion in the role and what you've achieved, and brought to the attention of the rest of us some issues that we otherwise wouldn't. So thank you for that. I would like to also make a nomination. I'd like to nominate Councillor Agar, who comes from a forces family, has a very broad understanding of the impact of military service on families and within the city, and I think would make an excellent champion.
Thank you very much. So we have 2 nominations for the position of Armed Forces Champion. I guess I asked for a show of hands. Oh, do we have any more speakers? Sorry. Okay, sorry, Steve.
I'd just like to...
Oh, Andy.
Sorry, I didn't realise you. Yeah, I'd just like to speak in support of Councillor Stanley. I'm aware of his long-term relationships with the armed forces and veteran groups in particular, his long association with Stepway and his deep ties with the military, and also on a higher level, if we look at where things stands with champions, I think if the Labour Party were to also take the Armed Forces champion, I think that would be 3 roles that they would be holding, and I think that the Conservative Party would just have 1. So I just want to sort of add that in as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I won't reiterate what's already been said regarding the qualifications James holds for carrying out this role, but what I am able to say is I've spoken with him about it, and I'm confident in his ability to not only carry out the role itself, but to do it with pride. His commitments to supporting our military will, I'm sure, second to none. Does commit to things like this, Stepway, the charity, completely. And I think it's fair to say that I'm also aware of his advocacy skills in speaking out on behalf of the armed forces, absolutely supporting their cause, and will physically assist as well in raising their profile.
Thank you very much. Yes, Adrian.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, who'd have thought there was going to be a competition? I do take Andy Stafford's point, actually, about the balance of the champions, but I think there are maybe, underlying reasons for that in the background. And the idea of the champion is not that it is some kind of political appointment. It's somebody who's actually worthy of doing it from their, if you like, from their non-political perspective, from the perspective of their ability and their merit. And I think what Councillor Agar has demonstrated over many years now and on the City Council and before that is her ability to understand and get inside local communities and local community groups, and particularly to be able to represent them very forcefully, very politely but very forcefully, for the good. And I think that the opportunity to represent the widest breadth of the armed forces community, which includes families and children and widows and beneficiaries and dependents and so on and so forth, is something where she would really stand out and provide us with a very good broad breadth of experience and a broad breadth of ability to take the role forward.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Would anybody, what's the first nomination is Councillor Stan. All those in favour, please. All those against? So where does that leave us? Now we do the same with the next one. Okay. So, so the second nomination was for Councillor Pat Agar. All those in favour, please vote. All those against? And any abstentions? So in that case, it is the new champion is Pat. Thank you, and congratulations, Pat.
Just say thank you to everybody.
May I just have a second?
Yes, of course.
Congratulations to Pat, and obviously, if I can be of any help in the course of your serving in this role, then please feel free to give me a shout.
And Pat, that includes me as well. Even though I've stepped down, I'll always be around. If contacts or anything like that, always feel free to pick up the phone.
Sat recently, but it was a Zoom meeting because of the hot weather, and therefore its decisions could not be counted as decisions and have to be brought here. And I'd like to ask Andy to present the report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, as Chair just outlined, the Environment Committee held last Tuesday was held on Zoom due to the 40 degrees temperatures and not wanting to sit in here. But because of that, we went through the process as if it was a fully fledged meeting, but it wouldn't. The decisions aren't legal unless we verify them this evening. So as in the paper, the items that need formal approval are the introduction of a pest control service, which was initially requested by the Licensing and Environmental Health Committee, then came for Environment, now here at PNR, which would bring us into line with other councils in the district, and there's a surplus of budget at Worcester Regulatory Services, which would fund it for 2 years. So there's no imminent impact on the council's budget. The next item was the Environmental Community Grants Scheme, which has already run once and proved very successful in allocating small amounts of grants for biodiversity schemes, schools and St Paul's Hospital and other community groups. So that's going to allow that scheme to run again. And then there's also a small allocation for an Environment Summit, which will be held in September, which I hope everyone can come to. The fifth item was an allocation of a budget to the Wild About Worcester wildlife route, which is a 12-mile circular route around Worcester, and this is to help fund the launch of that route, working with the WEG, the Worcester Environment Group, and OnSide. And then the final item was a funding of a feasibility study to look at increasing the solar panels on top of St Martin's Gate, potentially 5-fold from what's already up there, which would generate a lot of CO2 savings and income, especially with the increased electricity prices. So those were the items that have come forward for approval this evening.
Thank you, Andy. Can I just ask a question about item 6.1? This Policy and Resources Committee will do section 6.1 at a different meeting. It's not happening now, is it?
I believe it was approved at the Environment. It was on the Environment Committee paper,
Yes.
and we approved it at the Environment Committee to fund. But obviously, I'm assuming it might come to other committees in the future as well as the project develops. But certainly, that item was agreed at the Environment Committee.
So could I ask members to agree the recommendations from the Environment Committee as set out in this report? Yes? Now we come to item 13, which is the Arches Worcester, variation to lease to 56 Foregate Street. Shane.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate this is complex. I'll try and keep it simple. Normally, matters of property are dealt with under delegated powers because they often involve these complex arrangements around leases, but it was important, I think, that this item was brought to committee partly because it's a material item, but partly also, in fact, primarily because it was in February 21 that the committee approved the purchase of 54 to 55 and 56 Foregate Street, largely with the intention that with control of those buildings, we'd then be in a position to negotiate with Archco the demolition of 56 Foregate Street, which was then Jack's Chicken Shop, with the intention agreed for some time now under the Arches Worcester project to create a walkway from Foregate Street station down to the Riverside via the Arches. That is the policy intention. It was some time, in fact a year before February 21, that we asked Archco, with the head lessor, to let us know how much they wanted by of compensation for loss of income of the retail property. And it has taken until now for them to actually come forward with a proposal, which is set out in the confidential appendix. I can add to that that since we've received that, we have now heard from the board of Archco, who have formally accepted this proposal. So it is it's an offer which, if we agree, will go forward. The other complexity to take into account is that we're still waiting for the Arts Council to agree that we can extend the project programme. As things stand, all expenditure, capital expenditure and revenue expenditure, must be incurred by the 31st of March 2023, and it is self-evident that we can't complete all of this work in that time. So if the Arts Council don't agree, and we agree to proceed with it, then there is a risk that we will have to return some of the funding, the unspent funding, to the Arts Council and incur the additional costs ourselves. Now, just to confirm that we have sufficient budget within the Arches budget to meet the costs which are proposed here, but that will be a reduction of what we then have available to complete the demolition works. And there is a significant risk that the costs of those will exceed what we currently have in the budget. Therefore, I may be coming back to the committee later for a capital request to incur additional costs in order to complete the project. I think that's as much as I can say in respect of the items which are in the public agenda. If members wish to discuss in more detail the appendix, then we'd need to move to closed session and then return to complete the discussion. I'm happy to take any questions or any comments from members. Try to clarify anything as best as I can.
Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Question regarding the two arches that would be uncovered from the demolition of number 56. The implication from reading this is that this was a sort of a more recent sort of development, not from at the beginning. Just trying to understand why it wasn't something that was knowledgeable or understood at the beginning, that there was two arches there that would have become full.
Through you, Chair, Archco certainly weren't aware that when we took over the lease, we were taking, those were within our demise. They thought that they were part of their property. And so when we came to discuss what would happen with these two arches, they recognised at that stage that actually they had an interest in there when they hadn't realised that. Now, equally, at the beginning, we didn't really have any intention for using those two arches. It wasn't really something we were looking at as part of the project. The reason they've become very relevant is because the Arches project requires us, or one of the conditions of it, phase 2 as it was known of, was to acquire two other arches further down the row from Archco. But the prospect of doing that just fills me with horror, given all of the work and effort that we had to put in to acquire security of the other arches. And there's certainly no way that we could complete the project, I've suggested here, before September 2024 if we had to go through that process to acquire two arches. So the solution was proposed that we instead use the two arches which we've acquired somewhat inadvertently as part of this project, uncover them, and then put them into use. And we put that to the Arts Council a few weeks ago, and without a formal agreement, they agreed to that proposal, that yes, we could use those two arches. So that cuts out an awful lot of time and trouble, and actually gives us a workable solution to the project now. But it's dependent, as I say, on Archco agreeing to the extension of time. But I don't think there'll be any question they'll be happy with us to use those two arches for this purpose. It would have to be within the conditions of the grant, so they'd have to be for a creative use, and for the 5 years from the end of the funding period that they would be available, and Archco have agreed to that.
Can I just ask a question? Do I understand, therefore, that we're going to finish up with the 5 existing arches, 2 that won't be developed, and then the 2 that go with 54?
Not quite. We'll have the 5 existing arches and have security of those for 5 years from the end of the funding period, in which case they then revert to the university's use. And then we'll have these 2 other arches which will be uncovered with the demolition of 56. These are an alternative to the other 2 arches. So there'd only be 7 in total.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair. So the uncovering of these two arches then become our property, or and the second question is, if that isn't the case, then in terms of access to those 2 arches, we own the rights to the access to those 2 arches.
Through you, Chair. The position is that we currently own those arches. They're ours under the demise for 40 years. What Archco are proposing is that that they take ownership of them and let them back to us for 5 years only, to the end of the funding, 5 years after the end of the funding period, and then they revert to Archco, generating income from beyond that period. We get them for 5 years, and we can develop them and generate income from them, but after that they revert to Archco.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we've got ourselves in a position where we are beholden, potentially, we're beholden to Archco due to the time, and therefore they're using that leverage power, as probably anyone else, as I probably would if I was in that position, to get some benefit from themselves. However, I suppose the benefit for us is that having those arches where they are, as you immediately come out of Foregate train station and on Foregate Street, if they are developed, it makes an attractive entranceway to the new the arches strip, whereas previously we would have been doing arches further down the road. So from an aesthetic / place benefit, we do get some. But yeah, Archco, in businessman's parlance, are having his pants down on over this, but never mind.
For you, Chair, I think they are entitled to it. They expect some compensation from and benefit from the scheme. They're also getting the benefit of the uplift of the area, which is of value. And it's not our intention that we should develop these two arches to the same extent of the other ones, but to bring them into use and make them a valuable asset. It's to be hoped that over time, as the project progresses and this area becomes a destination, and we've seen some of the benefits last week in terms of the arches and their location and how they can be used to benefit the arts. We've got the other arches will be filled shortly. We've got tenants agreed and ready to go. That it becomes such that everyone is happy with what there is and it's left to continue, rather than the owners coming along and saying we want them back and to use them for commercial purposes. It's up to us to make it work.
Yes, I wonder if Shane just confirm or remind us the position with the other arches. So the ones which are already in play, at the end of the funding period, they're retained for 5 years. What happens at the end of that 5-year period? Where do they go back to?
They revert to the head lessor, which in this case is the university. Well, the university holds them under a lease from Archco, so ultimately they I'm not sure what. Do you know how long-term the lease is with the university?
It's at least 25 years. But the act of handing them back will trigger a rent review because the university had the benefit of them as storage only, and that period there'll be. So Archco will have an interest again in those negotiations.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions or comments? Oh, yes, Lynn.
Conversation comments does illustrate just how complicated some of these negotiations and legal arrangements and commercial arrangements can be. I mean, there's no Archco spent a small fortune to acquire every railway arch in the land, so to speak, and they obviously want a return on that investment. What we want is the community spaces, the regeneration of that space, and absolutely, as Councillor Mitchell says, the access through and from Foregate Street is really important. It is difficult when they are squeezing public money that maybe we hadn't anticipated. And I think there is a kind of a note of caution to some of these mega businesses and property investors, because I've certainly heard from family, that in London, with some of the arches, because of rent rises and so on, they're driving out some of the sort of cultural buzz and little businesses that regenerated bits of London. We are trying to create that buzz and that culture in Worcester. And I just hope that, say, corporate greed doesn't kind of kill the image and the vision of what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. James.
Chair, thank you. I mean, there was one quick point that came to me while Councillor Denham was speaking, which is I'll be very curious to get a sense when available, the length of contracts that are being offered to the potential tenants, because I think the point that Lynn has made about, you know, the building up of an area, taking it from essentially stage one to a point where it becomes a destination that people want to go to, and then of course if those tenants are then subject to rent reviews that are you know, punitive in some cases, then that might be, you know, that could drastically alter the look and the sort of vibe, if you like, to use an expression that younger people tell me is current today. You know, that's something is something I personally want to avoid, and we've not perhaps travelled that far down the road yet where we can get a sense of that happening. The other point that I was kind of interested in, we're confronted with a lot of deadlines here. Now, this is normal business practice, normal legal practice. There are a number of interested parties working together to come to a conclusion. What is the degree of how content are we that we are moving in a direction where these deadlines are, broadly speaking, going to be met? You know, because there are significant sums of money being tied into delivery or not of that element of the contract, and yeah, I guess that's it. I mean, it is the essence that we have as if you like, guardians of the public purse here. You know, how content are we going forward that these, in some cases, quite tight deadlines are actually going to be deliverable?
Through you, Chair. So in respect to the first area, we are working with the tenants that we currently have for Arches 1 to 5. So that's excluding Arch 27, which is a sort of performance come and go type arrangement. For the other 4 arches, we're working on the basis of just 2-year leases at the moment, and we can only give a 5-year lease at the most. But each of the tenants, because they are new organisations and they're developing, wanted a short-term lease, so they had the opportunity to say, well, if this isn't working for us, we can look elsewhere. So we're trying to be as flexible as possible to meet the needs of these sort of nascent developing tenants. In respect of timelines, we have a detailed project plan for the demolition, which is set at 14 months. So if we were to go ahead now, then we ought to be able to be in a position to complete this by September 23. I'm asking the Arts Council to allow us till April 24 to build in a margin of error, and I've absolutely no doubt that those timelines are achievable. There are 2 problems. One is that the stage of working with Archco through Arches 1 to 5 was extremely problematical, but at this time they've actually come forward with a proposed timetable and a regular set of meetings that we can adhere to, so they're being better from their point in terms of managing the time for the process. The other complex bit is that we're reliant on Network Rail to agree to allow us to close the railway for a time, for a weekend, while we do the demolition works which go above the railway line. So just that element of it. So we have no control over when that timeline will be.
Conversation with Network Rail in terms of you know, closing a significant piece of track. You know, how easily navigable is that conversation?
We've had a series of discussions with them, and they've been very positive about it. Network Rail are very engaged with this and are happy to proceed with it. What they will look to do is to schedule regular maintenance, so they do close the track from time to time for maintenance purposes, and they'll look to schedule that maintenance at the time which is convenient for the project. You know, that might be 6 months either side, but you know, they've been pretty positive. I'm content that we will be able to achieve the 14-month timeline.
Yeah, thank you through you, Chair. I mean, 3 points. I mean, I think, I suppose in terms of the whole Arches project and how that has been sold to us in terms of whether they were incubation units for starter arts community projects or for arts organisations in terms of that. And the wider point I think my colleague and James are making is that actually if they are incubation units for fledgling businesses, and then we help them grow, and then if such a point comes, that at the time of rent review, the rent reviews are pretty much out of the reach of those organisations. Do we as a council have a duty then to step in to ensure that those businesses remain in that, or are they still going to be held over the barrel by Artiscot? I think there's a duty of care in terms of us managing those expectations. The second point I really want to make is in terms of the wider public realm benefits that could spark on the back of the demolition of Jack's and that improvement of access. What other plans are there in terms of improving Foregate and the associated areas regarding that? And thirdly, the point in terms of what Shane was making is, if it goes over budget, how much more are you expecting it to go over budget by?
Through you, Chair. Yes, there were specific rules around the project as to what type of tenants that could inhabit the arches. So they do have to be within the creative industries, and it's not specified any more closely than that. What we did was agree a strategy for letting, which was based around two of the arches being sort of anchor tenants, firmly established organisations which could sort of come in quite quickly and get up and running. And then two others which would be around a sort of artist collective type approach, a shared space. And we've achieved that. The arch that's been let already, Arch 33, is an organisation called T-Label, which has been going for a couple of years and was an established organisation which moved in quite quickly. The second one was to another organisation, but unfortunately they after some months decided they weren't able to do it. So we're seeking I've come to terms with another tenant who is an established business within the creative sector, so we've achieved that. And then the two arches in the middle will be for an artist collective. This is a new setup, starting from scratch, so they've created a community interest company, and we're helping them as much as we can. In terms of the rent element, that is a key part of that, so there is a rent-free period, which we've been able to fund partly through using some of that startup grant, which I referred to earlier on. So we've been able to direct that through the managers to support these new companies going into the arches. And but we have been very clear right from the start that they will need to be sustainable businesses over time. So we would expect that after the 2-year tenancy, there will be a rent review, and that will look to increase the rents to something which is sufficient to recover the costs of running. So that would draw to an end the subsidy element of it. And they are well aware that after 5 years, then to Archco, and we have no control over that. We can talk to the university and hopefully agree that they sustain the tenancies, and that if we can make it work, then hopefully they'll do that. In terms of the public realm element, there is a public realm part of the Future High Streets Fund work, which has taken us along Foregate Street, and towards the end of that process, we've agreed that they will extend some of that through into the archway which is created, so through into the walkway. So we should, and Archco will want us to be clear about what we're doing in that area before they'll agree to the demolition. So we'll have to have those plans in advance, and members will be able to see those before we get to a final decision point. And then finally, in terms of how much more might it cost, well, it's very difficult. As we've said earlier in the meeting, things are a bit volatile. I would expect, as a rule of thumb, that we've got £250,000? £350,000 for the demolition works. I'd expect those to be half as much again. As things stand, we have about £900,000 or so left in the budget. If we don't, and we have 180,000 which we apply for the conversion of the two arches, well, we could potentially use half of that, perhaps, if we specification. We've got quite a bit left for the public realm works. So if we're only talking about paving, and we're not planning to do anything much more elaborate than that, then we shouldn't need all of that. So theoretically, with the following wind and without too much trouble, we theoretically could get it done within the budget that we've got. Just about. That's what Shane always says, isn't it?
What effect has COVID happened on this? Is it delayed? Is a project delayed, and how much?
Through you, Chair, it has delayed the project by a year, essentially. So we've had a project timeline. So in fact, COVID, perversely, has not had a negative impact on the project, because not only have we had a delay, which with the Arts Council have allowed us more time to do the works, but we also received additional funding, Kickstart Capital funding, which brought in another 140,000 to apply for the project, and a roughly 400,000 off the top of my head for revenue costs as well were increased, so we're able to afford some additional project management and extend the salary budgets for the festival's work as well. So COVID has had an impact, but it hasn't been a negative one.
We go on to approve 13. So can I ask members to approve a variation to the lease of 54, 55 and 56 Foregate Street on the terms set out on, oh, do we have to come back to that then?
Members feel that
Do members feel that they understand the private report enough?
Having said that, my apologies, Chair, having said that, actually, there was a slight change in the final version that the Arts Codes Board presented, which was that we're not to be in a position whereby we owe them any money at the date the project commences. Now, this is relevant because there is a dispute between them and the previous leaseholders over some unpaid bills. Those theoretically transferred to us when we took over the lease, so we would have to get the money from the previous tenants and then pay it across to that was an extra thing which the board added to the apologies. That's not unusual. It's not unusual to take over a debt from a previous tenant. The complexity in this case is that the tenant says there wasn't anything owing, and Arts Code says there was. So it's a matter of dispute. It will be resolved one way or another.
Thanks for that, Shane. So can I ask members to approve the recommendations in this report? Variation to the lease of 54, 55 and 56. Delegate authority to the Corporate Director of Finance and Resources and Planning and Governance, consultation with the Chair and Vice Chairs of the Committee to conclude negotiations and enter into all necessary legal agreements to complete the proposed variations and related works. Please indicate you're happy with that. Item 14 is any other business, and I'm not aware of any. So we now pass to item 15. I invite you to, to pass the resolution, but under section, do I have to read this out? Do we need to look at the, is everybody okay? All right. In that case, the meeting is closed. Thank you very much, everybody.